Is this crazy? We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in the history. Make America great again. How can you be against it?
The Senate is back in Washington taking up the bill that President Trump insists he wants passed by July 4th. That's the massive spending and immigration bill that Trump and his allies called the Big Beautiful Bill. And in fact, that's the official name now, Rhonda. It's the Big Beautiful Bill Act. But Senate Republicans are considering all the details in this bill. They're facing some real challenges on one particularly perilous issue, and that is health care. So Republicans are considering cuts to Medicaid that could affect millions. They're also looking at changes to the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, one of those other names that sticks. And that could cut off access to millions of Americans to that ACA marketplace. Welcome to Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey, and I'm here with Rhonda, Colvin, and James Hohmann. And today on the episode, we're going to talk about sort of the pitfalls and perils of taking on Medicare healthcare spending in this country. Is it more dangerous to Republicans than Democrats right now? Who's got the messaging on this? And also, what is the real substance of what they're doing? Let's start with Medicaid. You know, Rhonda, Republicans are like, there's no cuts to Medicaid, nothing to see here, folks, but it's a little more nuanced than that. Talk to us about what's in this bill.
Yeah, so this is the House version of the bill that was passed before the Memorial Day recess. So the Senate now has it in their hands, and this has always been a big talk around the Hill, is cuts to Medicaid. We know that around 10 million people will lose their coverage, and that's an estimate by the Congressional Budget Office if these cuts go through. One of the ways the cuts are designed, it's around changing the work requirements of how many hours would be needed for a person to be able to claim Medicaid. You have a lot of Republicans who have been uneasy about that in the House, of course, but now in the Senate. You have people like Josh Hawley. You have people like Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins. In fact, they are calling themselves the Medicaid moderates, or maybe they're not calling themselves that.
I don't think Josh Hawley is going to call himself a moderate.
Right. But it is this group that they are saying are the Medicaid moderates because this has become a red line for them. And they are across the ideological spectrum of Republicans. You think about Collins, who could be considered a real moderate. But as you mentioned, Hawley is more of a conservative Republican. But they're taking a stand to say that they don't want this.
You know, one thing they all have in common, although they're not the only Republicans, but they have really big swaths of rural constituents, right? But a lot of other Republicans do too, James. So why are these three saying, whoa, whoa, whoa?
They're smaller states. The coalition is changing. The parties are changing. Republicans used to be the party of smaller government. They used to be the party of, you know, the opposing government interference in healthcare. But the coalitions are changing where now in some states, a lot more Republicans are getting Medicaid than Democrats, and more rural, obviously it's gone Republican for a long time, but poorer people voting Republican. And so I think Josh Hawley wants to be president someday, and he's thinking ahead, and he sees this as a window. You know, Donald Trump was the first Republican in a while who came along and said, we're not touching entitlements, because he saw that it was politically perilous, and that Republicans for years, you think about like Paul Ryan in 2012, were getting beat up for wanting to fix or, you know, change Social Security or Medicaid. And so Trump said, nope, we're just not going to do it. And that worked for him politically. And so I think Hawley is following that lead and playing a long game. And I think Murkowski and Collins are both from these rural states, especially Alaska, with so many indigenous natives who really depend on these government supports.
I want to play some of what Josh Hawley had to say here, because like he's not just like being stopped in the halls and like whispering his thoughts. He's really going out there with a vantage point. So let's listen.
It is wrong to cut health care for the working poor. That's what we're talking about here with Medicaid. My state is a Medicaid expansion state. Over 20% of Missourians, including hundreds of thousands of children, are on Medicaid. And Mono, they're not on Medicaid because they want to be. They're on Medicaid because they cannot afford health insurance in the private market. These are working people and their children who need health care. So I hope that the House GOP and the Senate GOP will get the message here. By the way, President Trump has said the same thing. No Medicaid benefit cuts.
That is Senator Josh Hawley talking to Manu Raju on CNN. So, okay, what's the Republican argument to make these cuts? And because once again, they're not calling them cuts, but Josh Hawley's sort of looking it in the eye.
So the Republican argument is these programs have massively expanded over the last few decades, and that initially they were for really people who needed it. And now there's a lot of people who are on Medicaid, partly because of the expansion under Obamacare, who are able-bodied young men of working age who if they didn't have these benefits could go get a job. And what Republicans will also say is that even though undocumented immigrants are not technically allowed to receive these benefits, that in practice, millions of illegals, as they put it, are able to get it. They're able to sign up for Medicaid and collect benefits. And so they're saying, we just want to put in place paperwork requirements and verification and some work requirements so that we can make sure that able-bodied men aren't getting it, and that people who aren't supposed to be in this country aren't getting free health care. And Democrats dispute that they are, and it goes back and forth. And so Republicans are just saying, we just want it to check the eligibility. And then the CBO is saying, well, in practice, it's going to become so complicated that people who are deserving, who are going to struggle with the paperwork, just will end up dropping off the rolls. So you're cutting millions of people, even if you're not changing the underlying eligibility requirements.
Rhonda?
And also, one of the logistical reasons why they are going after Medicaid is because this reconciliation bill includes the Trump tax cut plan. And in order to pay for that, you needed to cut. So Medicaid was always the first program that was sort of on the chopping block because it has so much money appropriated to it. So that is one of the reasons, too, why Republicans decided to go after this program. But yeah, backing up what James said, this has been a target for the Republicans, especially, I know we're going to talk about it in a little bit, especially when it comes to Medicaid and also the Affordable Care Act. Right now, Republican senators are looking at this as a vehicle to kind of quietly repeal the ACA, because it is not very popular to go after people's Medicaid or any sort of health care.
So dig into like what the ACA angle is and what they're trying to do to Obamacare. A lot of us remember that Donald Trump tried to roll that back and repeal it in his first term. And there was that moment where Senator John McCain, may he rest in peace, did the thumbs down. It was all over. I mean, it was really like a shocking political moment where McCain said, no, we're not going to do this. So how is this different than that big push they were doing last time? And are there any McCains out there who could stop it?
There may be some McCains. I don't think that this whole bill is a shoo-in right now as it stands. If it were to be, brought to a vote, which it's not today or this week, you're not seeing the type of Republican support to push this through right now in the Senate. However, what is going on with the ACA in this bill is that through the Medicaid cuts and also reducing people's access to the insurance marketplace that was created by the ACA, people would lose their coverage. So this is almost a way to quietly repeal the ACA without saying it, because you remember when Trump and Republicans tried to do it the first time in his first administration, it didn't play well, and the effort to do so was abandoned. Right now, if it's quietly tucked away in this bill under the guise of fixing Medicaid eligibility, this might be a way to repeal it.
Like to really gut it. So
right,
instead of an outright
it,
repeal and replace,
right.
It's like gutting it.
You would have about, combined with the people who access the marketplace and the cuts to Medicaid, you might have around 11 million people who would lose their healthcare coverage or have it change in a dramatic way. One interesting thing that I saw within the last 24 hours is former President Obama has spoken out, which honestly, years ago, I know we're in different political times, you didn't see former presidents weigh in on legislation that's active. But he's been out on social media telling people to call their lawmakers, because this really will impact people who utilize the Affordable Care Act.
And to your point, it is rolling back Barack Obama's signature achievement as president, the ACA. the story of entitlement programs, never in U.S. history has an entitlement been given and then taken away. And Republicans knew this when they fought tooth and nail to stop the ACA in 2009 and 2010, because they knew once Obamacare takes effect, you're not going to be able to take it away. People are going to become accustomed to these benefits. And there are a lot of Americans, even now, who don't really associate a lot of their healthcare benefits with the government. Remember during the Tea Party, now 15 years ago, there were the signs that would say, government, keep your hands off my Medicare. And that is a reflection of, I think there's this desire to have smaller government, but then operationally people want these benefits and seniors depend on them, et cetera. And one of the things of the last decade with all these states expanding Medicaid, you had a lot of Republicans in state legislatures who said it's going to be more expensive than because it's generous and so people are going to get on the program. It's going to cost a lot. The federal government is saying they're going to pay for 90% of the match and that the states will only be on the hook for 10%. But eventually the federal government's going to pull that back because it's going to be so expensive. And so in some ways we are seeing what's going on, and it's Republicans doing it, but they're validating a lot of the concerns about expanding Medicaid. And they're also underscoring the very real historic dynamic, which is you never can take away an entitlement once you give it to people. Social Security, Republicans opposed in the 30s. They ended up having to get on board in order to win elections again. Medicare in the 60s, they called that universal health care, said that was going to destroy everything. They ended up having to get on board. Medicaid, which was initially a much smaller thing than Medicare, sort of grew and grew and grew over time. So it's fascinating to watch because even politically, remember in 2010, healthcare was a huge winning issue for Republicans because people weren't experiencing it yet. It was still
Obamacare passed,
right?
And then there was the midterm election. Republicans did really well,
and a lot of people
Democrats they made a lot of political sacrifices for that. A lot of those blue dog Democrats who or they even exist anymore, Rhonda, were they took this vote and they got voted out of office.
And so they did sacrifice their career. It was that, and I think a lot of people did so knowingly. This was, but then
it kicked in.
Once it kicked in, feel it. Remember in the 2018, it was such a huge issue. Pre-existing
we didn't know
conditions.
McCain was going to save it. I mean, that really was kind of a big political moment.
Yeah.
Because it was so close.
Right.
But the things that tipped him over were
pre-existing conditions, and he was dying of brain cancer at the time. I think he had a kind of late in life conversion.
There were also things that people your kids can stay on your health insurance until they're 26 and things like that. There were other elements of it that had to have pay-fors and had to have ways to but they were included and they were popular provisions. Yeah. So I'm old enough to remember a lot of people talking about work requirements. I mean, this is not something new. I was listening to a discussion of some younger folks who cover the White House, not at the Washington Post, I will say, who were this new idea of work requirements. It's the Republicans' new technique. And I'm like, oh, my friend, that has been around for a long time. So is this different? Is this more nuanced, do you think, than arguments passed for work requirements?
I think it's very similar, right?
Yeah.
It is very similar. I don't really see a lot of difference in the way that Republicans have tried to put work requirements on programs, including SNAP, the food stamps program. So work requirements have always been out there. I think what's different this time is some really interesting messaging where you have Republicans, specifically House Republicans, who are out there right now saying, these aren't cuts to Medicaid. This is that people will choose to be off Medicaid if they decide not to go along with the work requirements. So they're softening the language. They're trying, new ways to message. But it's nothing. It's not different.
Mm. I mean, in the 90s, it is the politics have changed so much.
Yeah, totally.
Bill Clinton in 1996 signs
it wasn't just Republicans.
Welfare reform, the end of welfare as we know it, and it did actually reduce the welfare rolls in half over the 5 years afterwards, and it replaced welfare with temporary aid to needy families. One of the things Democrats make a mistake about is that work requirements test off the charts. They're super popular. It's very challenging to explain to an independent voter why requiring someone to work to get healthcare benefits is not a good idea. And so I think Republicans see this as a a well they can go draw from because it tests really well. Work requirements for able-bodied men.
Also the question of whether or not people who are here in the country legally should get it, which, as you said, is like a little bit more complicated because there already are rules in place. Which brings us to Senator Joni Ernst. All right, so let's dig more into the PR messaging and how everybody's kind of trying to jump on this, because Democrats really are trying so hard to use this moment to spin this and capitalize and say they are trying to take away Medicaid, they are trying to ding Medicare, and they're trying to go after your healthcare benefits through Obamacare. And, you can almost see the commercials being written sometimes. Like in this moment, when Joni Ernst was at a town hall, y'all have probably already heard this tape, but let's listen to it fresh one more time. Here's Senator Ernst being asked in a town hall about changes to healthcare benefits.
Illegals that are receiving Medicaid benefits, 1.4 million, 1.4, they are not eligible, so they will be coming off. So people are not, well, we all are going to die.
Senator Ernst was at a town hall in Butler County, Iowa on Friday. Okay, so she's making what could be a winning argument for Republicans at first about people who are not here in the country legally getting Medicaid. And then she drops the bomb. We're all gonna die. And that's the part that you can see the ad, right? Of like how heartless, how, right. James?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those classic, like, you can see why the NRCC told members of the House, the National Republican Congressional Committee said don't hold town halls because they're trying to avoid clips exactly like that. And you have people going and bird dogging candidates. In 2009, the National Democratic groups told members don't have town halls to get yelled at about Obamacare and death panels and all this stuff. And that's an example of—
Which were not real,
but it's an example of the need for message discipline in those situations, because someone in the crowd yells, "You're killing people, we're all gonna die," and then she's responding to someone in the crowd. Obviously, we don't see that person in the crowd, we just see that clip. And it is, I think, politically damaging in a state where it's been trending red. But Joni Ernst in 2014 beat a Democratic, or she replaced a Democratic incumbent, beat a Democrat in an open race. And it's the kind of state where in a really good year for Democrats, the right candidate could potentially challenge Ernst. And so that's why she ends up kind of trying to go into something like damage control mode.
I would not call this damage control mode,
Doubling
James.
down
would
mode?
You, Rhonda?
I don't know what I would call it.
Should we roll the tape and let everybody decide? Okay, so this is, I would not call this damage control. I would call this like the comms team was like, no, why did you do this? But maybe I'm wrong. Okay, so Joni Ernst filmed something this weekend where she's in, now if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll see this for yourself. She's in what appears to be a cemetery. Note the tombstones behind you. I did not notice that upon first glance. And she sort of apologizes, but she really isn't apologizing. So let's listen.
I made an incorrect assumption that everyone in the auditorium understood that, yes, we are all going to perish from this earth. So I apologize. And I'm really, really glad that I did not have to bring up the subject of the tooth fairy as well.
What you talking about the tooth fairy? Does she have bad news about my tooth fairy? I hope my kids aren't listening to this. So Rhonda, what gives?
I look at this two ways. One, I definitely look at the politics. I think Joni Ernst is having this non-apology apology that feels very Trumpian. I think she knows that plays with his base in Iowa. And remember, Trump won Iowa handedly this last election and the last two times that he ran. So I think she is trying to speak to the group that just won't care if she makes fun of the way that, she had a bit of a tone-deaf moment. I also look at it as she's making a calculation because of that. She knows that the base is there. She's making a calculation that this will be okay. It'll probably be forgotten about by the time she has a serious Democratic opponent. But I wonder, too, the biggest issue when you see things like this from lawmakers is you realize that they are a little bit out of touch, maybe a lot out of touch. I don't know. I think lawmakers, because they do not have a lot of encounters with average people that they are representing, that they can kind of poke fun at these moments when people took that really seriously at the town hall, and that outrage was real for some people, that she did appear tone deaf. I don't know if it will tank her reelection bid. We're a little far off from that, but I think she is doing something in the image of Trump that, I'm not apologizing for this. I'm just going, all in on what I said.
Yeah, like, oh, you poor babies, like, buck up. But, there could have been a different messaging here, James, where she was like, look, guys, I'm talking about, in her word, illegals taking your hard-earned taxpayer dollar-funded medical. Like, she could have been like, here's what I was talking about. Here's what I'm really mad about. Here's why we're going to vote this way. And she didn't. She went with the sarcastic.
Glib, laughing it off. And I do think there were people upset about it, but but I think she's calculating those people aren't going to vote for her anyway. And that the Trump coalition doesn't want you to show weakness. They don't want you to actually apologize. And
you guys both make such a great point on that front. Totally.
In Joni Ernst's case, I think she sees this as faux outrage. Of course we're all going to die. That. And she was being flip and thinks that the way to respond to the outrage is to be flip again, because there is kind of this fake umbrage that happens so often in politics where it's sort of pearl clutching, where both sides do it. And I don't know. It's hard to see this. I guess it could become part of a narrative, like a data point where it's sort of oh, she's out of touch. But it's hard to see a year and a half.
It can be. I don't know. A year and a half from now is when the campaign ads will be being cut.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, that is kind of a campaign ad in waiting for an opponent. However, I do think if you look at Joni Ernst's performance in her last reelection, that was a closer race than expected. And I think under the right conditions, with the right candidate to go up against her, she might have a tough time. And while people may not remember that exact clip a year from now, they may just remember it's a part of reasons they may prefer another candidate at this time. So she may not want to overcalculate how the Trump base is always behind him in Iowa, because it may not be behind others who try to do things from his playbook.
Yeah, I mean, just there was a reverberation of the Obamacare vote. We don't know what the reverberation yet will be over the Big Beautiful Bill Act, right? We don't yet know if it will pass. We don't know how it will transform. And then we don't know if there will be a backlash, if there will be seismic shift in public opinion. And it also will take a little while for folks to realize, holy crap, that stuff we were all talking about, those are my benefits. That's my family.
But it's not.
That's not somebody else. That's not a quote unquote illegal or some urban person. That's me in rural America who's working really hard to get my family by, and those are my benefits. So we don't know how all of that's going to play and if it's going to be felt by people. So what about the calculation the Democrats are trying to make right now, James, with they're trying to, take away people's health care. They're trying to, take the money and give rich people tax breaks while they're taking away healthcare from the poor and needy.
Yeah, it's really interesting because Democrats aren't emphasizing the debt piece of this because that just isn't resonant with voters. It is I'm a wonk in Washington, so I'm not on Medicaid, but the debt is a huge deal, and we're at $37 trillion. This is going to add trillions of dollars to the debt. It really is deficit busting, and it's not going to generate, even with growth, it's not going to generate nearly enough revenue to offset the cuts. But Democrats aren't leaning into that because the deficit's getting worse. That's not going to make people in Iowa go vote against Joni Ernst. It is going to be interesting because I think Republicans did their big tax cuts in 2017 and thought that they would be a much bigger winner for them in 2018 than they turned out to be. They thought we're giving people tax cuts, we'll get rewarded for that. And it just didn't really pan out that way. It will be interesting to see where, if we actually get a bill by July 4th, which John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, said today he wants to do. What we haven't really talked about today are the fiscal hawks in the Senate Republican conference.
Yeah.
Who are saying the cuts to Medicaid, that we should cut Medicaid. So we have the Josh Hawleys and Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, but you have Rand Paul, Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, Rick Scott from Florida, who are saying we need to have
this bill will raise the debt.
Right.
Yes.
And like by trillions of dollars.
Yes.
And if we're going to do these tax cuts, we do need to get rid of the ACA. Like we need to go cut into the bone because we have to pay for it, and government shouldn't be doing this. And so there are a couple of people who are saying that. And basically what Trump wants to do is to just sort of like bully those.
Muscle it through.
Yeah, muscle's better than bully. Like,
well, he was bullying Rand Paul.
He's bullying Rand Paul on
what
social
were you
media.
Saying, Rhonda?
No, I was going to use the word steamroll, but
Steamroll.
all of those,
Okay, so
Steamroll, that's the
all
best.
those synonyms work. Yeah.
But I mean, he was going after Rand Paul on social media in a way
said-
that was bullying, steamrolling, and muscling all at once.
Yeah, he said he didn't understand, that Rand Paul didn't understand the big, beautiful bill and that his ideas are crazy.
I thought at first, Rhonda, you were going to say like, I don't understand Rand Paul. Like, what are you like? Let's have a chat. Let's talk it out.
I was trying to paraphrase what President Trump said. But
no, I thought
also,
that he could have a message of like, let's come out of my office. Let's talk. Let's do a round of golf. Instead, he's like, you don't know what you don't understand anything.
Yeah, on social media, which does signal that this might be more of a fight than, of course, the House had their fight, but they tend to get in line with President Trump quicker.
Mm-hmm.
But the Senate knows it has its last word on this. And of course, whatever changes they make, that's going to bounce back to the House. So that's a whole other thing.
Are you busy July 4th?
I know, right?
We need to
I'm
show
looking
that
at
day,
September
right?
at this point.
December.
Are you?
Because, well, honestly, and James brought up the point about the Hawks, there are different factions. There are people in the Republican Party in the Senate who can say, Medicaid's my red line. There are some who are just saying, I'm uneasy about doing all of this all at once, and they don't have a specific issue. There are some who say we should have broken this up. We cannot pass something this big. So, and there are also, there was a small group saying the rollback of some of the Biden-era climate initiatives, the clean energy tax incentives, their constituents are enjoying that, and that is turning into an issue for them. So there's a lot of negotiations on the Hill right now that I think, the Trump administration and Republicans who are very loyal to him don't want you to realize are happening. But Thune can only lose 3 Republicans on this vote. And right now, in my head, I can calculate maybe at least 6 who have signaled that they just aren't comfortable for whatever reasons. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of talking that needs to happen for the next 2 weeks.
And they all have a lot of leverage.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Okay, well, this just in from X. A little guy named Elon Musk has tweeted and weighed in on the Big Beautiful Bill Act. I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it. Do I get extra credit for my dramatic?
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you. So does he matter?
Less than he did in December. I remember in December, he blew up the continuing resolution bill to fund the government going into Christmas. Yes. And he does not have that kind of power anymore. I mean, the day after he leaves the administration, Trump yanked the nomination for his good friend to be the administrator of NASA, which I think said a lot about Elon's standing in the administration. So I don't think that's going to tank the bill by any stretch, but
it just muddies the water, though, and it's going to tick off Trump, right? It's like it's poking the bear.
And it's going to be interesting to see because you could have more back and forth. I mean, obviously, there's a large number of people who just want any bill, just pass the bill.
Let's go home
take
for
the
July
win.
4th.
Yeah, but like no one. One of the big issues in the House was SALT, the state and local tax deduction, and how do you compromise to get some votes from New York, New Jersey, California Republicans? No Republican in the Senate cares about SALT. So for their version, they could just get rid of the SALT deduction altogether as a pay for, and it would be $1 trillion, even though they know that in conference committee it's going to get added back in. So there's going to be funny negotiations. Mike Johnson went and talked to the Senate Republicans last week and said, please make as few changes as possible. It's a very heavy lift. I don't have a lot of room to spare, but this is the Senate and they're going to do what the Senate does.
Shame on those of you who voted for it.
I will add to that the Musk tweet or X post. A lot of irony there because Elon Musk gave millions to House Republican races that could have tilted the balance where they got the majority that
also,
they have.
Also, he failed to cut gazillions of dollars from the government with Doge. Like that did not yield massive savings for the American people.
So the people he's saying shame on you, he also perhaps helped them win and have a vote on that bill.
Rhonda, James, thank you so much. That's all for Sidebar today. Find us on your favorite podcast app. Watch along with us on YouTube. We'll see you again soon. I'm Libby Casey. Thanks for listening.